Hi everybody, welcome to May I Interrupt. My name is Craig Norman and I'm here from Las Vegas where we are broadcasting at the Global Specialty Lens Symposium along with my co-speaker, co-interview, Dr. Jason Jedlicka. Jason, how are we doing?
Hi Craig, it's a pleasure to be back in the saddle again.
Yeah.
And enjoying the blue glow off your head is great.
Oh
and,
yeah, right off the bat
just
we
like
gotta
old
go
times.
there, huh?
Just like old times.
You know, so just to let everybody know, it may be another year, but he's got the same tired jokes that he has every year. And maybe
That's
one of these
true.
days he'll come up with some new meat.
I might. I'm working on it.
Well, what we're really happy about today is we have a very interesting guest that has agreed to spend some time with us while he's here, Dr. Ian Flitcroft. Ian is from Ireland, and we're going to ask him to just tell us a little bit about his background before we dig in deeper into somebody who has been an integral part of the area of myopia and myopia progression over the last few years. Ian, welcome. Thank you very much for coming. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So can you share with our audience a little bit of your story?
Okay, well, I've been in this game for over 30 years, and I often describe it from the time I was doing my first doctoral PhD research. I was, one of my supervisors was a good friend of Josh Wallman, and then that introduced me to myopia. But for many years, it was just, I describe it as my hobby. I would do research papers on that, was working very much by myself or in collaboration with international people while I was training to be an ophthalmologist. And then I spent the last 20 odd years as a pediatric ophthalmologist. So actually, and most of those kids were rare diseases or just conventional squint surgery. And steadily it built and built so that myopia got bigger and bigger. And I was sitting there advocating, obviously, for myopia control as an entity. And our meetings went from 20, 30 people to 50 to 100. Suddenly we were filling halls. Right. And the last 4 or 5 years, what I call my hobby has now become literally my day job. And what was my day job has now become, I'm now in the hospital down to 1 full day every 2 weeks just doing some of this rare disease stuff. So my life has pivoted around to myopia control being my primary focus.
Okay, so 9 out of 10 work days is in myopia?
It is now, yeah.
And one is in pediatric ophthalmology,
yeah.
separate from that.
And, 5 years ago, it was the other way around.
Right.
And that reflects a change in my life. It also reflects a change in this field, which is going from what I always described as a minority interest sport.
Yeah.
And another analogy was like, I always regarded the myopia control as like the Cinderella topic, she never gets to go to the ball. And
Right.
now Cinderella, she's at the ball, so she's arrived.
If I can, let me ask, when was the first time you ever gave a presentation on myopia control? Like in what year?
Myopia control. Well, I gave a presentation, did a paper, I think it must have been 96,
Okay.
96 in that area.
So
looking at
25 years ago, though, right?
yeah, maybe more than that, yeah. So that was looking at this was the time before the Comet study came out.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of my work is either clinical trials work, or another big area of my work is very mathematical, computational modeling and big data stuff that I'm doing now. And that was just looking at the oculomotor factors and seeing how something like Comet might have worked, but as we discovered, it didn't quite work the same way we expected. And for many years, Josh Wallman I got to know very well. He was a great, marvelous figure, and we'd sort of meet up in Florida. And Josh was a mad foodie, so his mission was always to choose the craziest restaurant to go to. And then we start sort of going down talking about stuff and shooting the breeze and sort of drawing on napkins about sort of ideas, and then we'd meet up a year later and go, Flitcroft, that idea you had last year, you know what? You were wrong.
Yeah.
Or you're right, or you were half right. And then being told you were half right by Josh Wallman was
right. Well, like in the beginning, the discovery phase, that's exactly right?
Yeah.
What seemed to be correct today is, backed up by evidence that it wasn't right a year later. 2 years
Yeah, and
later.
it gets more and more sort of complicated to go past, and you always hope that it doesn't get so complicated that people find it sort of too daunting. I think we're kind of in that phase now. There's a lot of people who, because it's changed quite fast from having no available treatments. So suddenly, as soon as the FDA approved a contact lens, that was like suddenly, it was like, whoa, wait a second, what do we do now?
Right.
And the expectation is that the world's going to suddenly move around and start using that lens. And that's just not the way innovation happens in medicine. I mean, my off-quoted figure is it takes 17 years from a proven efficacious treatment
Right.
to widespread
Right.
use.
Yeah.
And the effort you have to do to actually get there
Yeah.
is crazy.
Phenomenal.
Do you know the Barry Marshall story? Barry Marshall,
No.
Tell us.
this is a great story. So Barry Marshall won a Nobel Prize. There's an Australian guy, and he was the guy that discovered that bacteria give you stomach ulcers. So at a time when drug companies were making billions selling antacids, Tagamet and cimetidine at the time, his research was taking sort of biopsies, and he showed this weird bacteria in these samples, and said, "Oh, that's nonsense." And they tried to grow it, and they couldn't. But then he stuck at it, and then he showed that in mice that these bacteria could make give you stomach ulcers, and no one was believing this guy. So what he did is, and without telling his wife apparently, he made a culture of this stuff, had an endoscopy, took pictures of his stomach, drank it, and then 2 weeks later did the same thing. And he was just falling apart with sort of full of stomach ulcers. So he, over the course of, and it took him 15 years, and was literally laughed at by having a complete paradigm shift of just taking tablets every day for 20 years to stop your sort of heartburn, or you take antibiotics for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And you're cured.
And you're cured.
And you imagine how well that went down with the drug companies.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But so I just, as long as I don't have to swallow sort of,
Right.
bacteria soup and
Yeah.
get a stomach ulcer to prove what I'm doing. So I think I've taken the really easy path here.
Correct.
Actually, just by you write a few papers, you travel around, you tell people this is a really important topic. Let's do something about it. Easier route than poor Barry Marshall.
I think that kind of story is common with visionaries, right?
Sure.
Because it's against the grain.
Yeah.
Oh,
that
yes.
everybody else has accepted something as the way to go, and now you're challenging the thought process.
Yeah, and that change of mentality is the biggest obstacle we face now.
Yeah.
So we have treatments, but we have people who have never been thought to manage this condition in a long-term management way as opposed to a transactional interaction. Somebody comes in, you can see them, you can treat them, you can do an intervention, fit a lens, correct them, and until they come back in the door next time, that next visit is, you can just really start afresh and do whatever you want to do. That continuity of care, that doses of monitoring, and treating condition in a completely different way that you were trained to do is a big ask of medical professionals. And then are healthcare professionals, are they risk takers?
Yeah.
We're in Vegas, are they the ones?
Right.
But they're not. I mean, they're actually
No.
pretty risk averse.
Exactly.
So, they love to be be in the safety of the herd.
Sure.
Yeah.
And another common graph I've been using for, it must have been 10 years now, is that phrase of Moore's chasm. Have you come across the concept? So this is
Leap in the chasm.
leap in the chasm. So which about technology, and that the field of microcontrol now is full of the early adopters. And in terms of moving across to the majority of eye care practitioners, I think we're making a bridgehead there, but I don't think we're safely across that yet.
Right.
But I think there's enough momentum now, and I think this is where industry investment actually really helps to push that.
Yeah.
So this is a genie that's not going back in the bottle. So
May I interrupt, Craig?
Absolutely, my friend.
So I'm curious. You've been around myopia for a long time. I feel like going back 30 years or whenever we were talking about when you first talked about it, a lot of the idea or the belief or the development of myopia was it was inherited or somehow genetic. And then, and I still think that's a part of it, but I think that idea has changed and we see increasingly environmental influences impacting. And I'm just curious if you could talk about your personal perspective on the role of each and what is it that someone inherits specifically that puts them at risk of myopia?
Well, so, I mean, the genes we have are designed to make our eyes to achieve emmetropia. And the human genome hasn't changed in the last 10,000 years. But obviously myopia is a relatively recent onset. One of my favorite studies about genetics is Frank Thorne did a paper where he went off to the jungle and looked at indigenous Brazilians and looked at how many of those were myopic. And so he took a whole village, examined them, and found that, I can't remember the number, it's about 400 people, that the average, almost everyone was emmetropic, and they found 2 myopes. And they were the only 2 people in this village who could read.
Yeah.
Right.
So you've got this process, the set of genes which are present in us, monkeys, mice, zebrafish have the same eye control mechanism. So what makes kids myopic is rarely is weird genes that mess up, that makes their eyes develop abnormally, and that's part of my day job, the syndromic myopia. Other times is where that system is designed to regulate our eyes to achieve emmetropia, and emmetropia is within 200 microns. That's sort of a human hair thickness of regulating your eye length to match your optics, which is a pretty amazing thing. And we know from some of the big studies, some of the big ones in at the ALSPEC, which is a UK study where they examined 5,000 kids and followed them all the way through and genotyped them all. There's a few of those genes that are linked in GWAS studies to myopia, but you find that it only makes you myopic if you read a lot of books. So we have this mechanism to make our eyes grow normally. If you live in the Amazonian jungle, you grow normally. If you put those kids in Rio and put them in school, the weird things we do with our eyes is somehow messing up what those genes are trying to do.
Correct.
And just driving us up in the wrong direction. So it's kind of a maladaptive, we're just confusing the hell out of our eyes. We did not evolve to live in a sort of a high contrast world or just be staring at a page with a very, very sort of weird sort of the super high contrast image. So where a blurred page is radically different to a blurred room like this.
Sure.
And some of the stuff I did a few years ago was about when you look at what the human eye evolved to look at, which is natural images, and there's this weird relationship between spatial frequency that in a natural image, you put it a certain way, almost every tree, every image outside has the same spatial frequency spectrum. But if you look at the urban buildings or interior buildings, we're actually looking at scenes which are radically different to what our eyes are optimized to see. So if our eyes are expected to see an image of a certain spatial frequency detail, and that image is out of focus because your eyes need to grow, what is actually experiencing is something that you never evolved to. So I think that the genes are there, but we are just confusing the hell out of that system.
Sure. So what you're saying is that the bigger part of it is environmental.
But those environmental impacts have their impact on eye growth, and all that machinery is genetic.
Sure. So that's kind of what I'm curious about is what is it about one person? So my entire family, both my parents, all my siblings, all hyperopic. Okay? And growing up, I have one sister who is an avid reader. She's about a 1 diopter myope as an adult now, but only 1 diopter.
Right.
Someone else could come from a family and read a little bit and end up a 6 diopter myope. What is it structurally about the eye that creates such a different response to those environmental stimulus? Is it the choroid? What is it? Is it a structural weakness or flaw that makes one eye more malleable than another? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So what we know is that my sort of adage is that hyperopes are born and myopes are made. So we all start hyperopic. So what people often forget about in when they're doing studies of genetics is they just take where somebody is now. They haven't looked at where they've come from. So your family is a great example. So if you're born on the hyperopic end of the range, you have this big buffer zone. Your sister, if she was born ametropic, she'd be -6.
Potentially, yeah.
So and we did a big study on looking at genetic syndromes that make you either long-sighted or short-sighted. And the genes that make an eye very, very long-sighted are all genes that operate in these pathways evolved in organogenesis. They're blueprint genes. So in your family, you have a whole bunch of genes that your blueprint is a bit short in terms of
similar
in your eyes.
Yeah,
Your proportion. There you go.
Yes.
Smaller, short eyes. So that, and then other families will be will have longer eyes. So if you look at the emmetropic eyes of kids with myopic parents, their eyes are already big, even though they're emmetropic. And then from your starting point, what life influences you have and how your genes react to those determines what life path you're going to do. So you can start from the same point, have the same genes, and end up with very different reactions because one's a fisherman and one's a nuclear physicist, and they go and read books. Or you can be 2 nuclear physicists and have different genes, and one you say is emmetropic, and one you becomes myopic. So it's this life journey from where you start and the hand you're dealt with genetically.
Yeah.
But your starting point, that's entirely genetic. And I mentioned some of these genes that we know if they make you myopic is entirely dependent on what you do with your eye.
Yes.
And I mentioned about this set of machinery that control your eye growth. The whole point about those genes is they're all designed to detect the environment. So all the big GWAS studies, when you look at those fantastic figures from the CREAM consortium about little diagrams and 50 genes, little arrows, where are they all pointing to?
Yeah.
Most of those are pointing to the retina, because the eye can only know how to grow into focus if it's detecting what's in the retinal image. So they're built to sense the environment.
Sure.
And makes the eyes grow to match that environment. That's what that machinery does. So if you have if you have a few defective genes, you'll end up myopic. But if you have a very abnormal environment, that machinery will do what it can with it. But if you're sending it, there's nonsense in, nonsense out. And if you give it information that is has no idea what to do with it.
Right.
And one of the things that when I sort of analyze, I hate the average of anything. I think the average hides all the good bits. I mean, I was a big man for looking at distributions. And a lot of the interventions that people said makes animals short-sighted. So deprivation, the classic one, you cover an eye. It makes you short-sighted. But you look at the distribution of those refractions. It doesn't make you short-sighted. It messes up your development.
Right.
You go from a little peak of a distribution of normally animals to this mad flat thing. some are 0, some are -10.
Yes.
And everything in between. So it's not like you've just shifted a nice regulated bunch of emmetropes to a bunch of myopes. You've taken an eye that's grown normally and achieved this, miraculous feat of emmetropia, or whatever's normal for that animal, and you just splattered it.
So how each eye responds to this altered stimulus is different.
Yeah, but you've gone from a system which controls the eye to achieve a certain goal, to you've done something like, block all sides, and you've messed up the control system.
Gotcha. Yeah,
So-
when you block it out entirely, the eye will respond in just unpredictable ways. Whereas if you give it some stimulus, it's a more predictable outcome.
Yeah, so if I said, if I had 10 people here and said, okay, walk from here to that stand over there, they're going to do a pretty good job of it.
Sure.
If I put the same people and put blindfolds on them, spun them around,
Right.
and said, okay, go and find that stand over there. And you're sort of sitting up here with a camera and watch all these little people. They'd be sort of like ants. They'd be, and that's exactly what happens to eye growth with these interventions that make you myopic. Whereas in fact, what they do is they mess up the systems that stop you becoming myopic.
Yep. Yeah.
So again, on a macro level, when you get the opportunity to present a paper or give a presentation to your peers, primarily ophthalmology and in particular pediatric ophthalmologists, this thought of a process that can control the growth of the eyes, the myopic control, is this something that is well received today, or is it still very questionable? And then the second part of that is when you do talk to those audiences, you talk in terms of the different kinds of potential therapies or treatments. Atropine either single or combined with something else, and then of course along with that, the use of ortho-K as an example, and also different type of soft contact lenses.
Well, I think when this was started, when we were all, very much looking at the theory, the genes, or the animal studies, the meetings and the presentations were very much about, this more sort of, detailed thought process about, how does this happen? Some of the deeper questions, getting very, a small group of people sort of, overthinking it, quite frankly. And we all spent 20 years doing that, and the outcome of that is that we have, treatments now available that you can apply without overthinking.
Yeah.
I think now is that we don't need to talk, go into too much detail about the exact control mechanism. We just, so they've now shifted across to, rather than talking about the physiology and that, to there's really only 2 points, which is, is not treating myopia a good idea?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that is now a bad idea. I think people are getting that concept. It's the second biggest risk factor for eye health after age. And then, what do we have available to treat, and does it work?
Right.
And at that point, my thing is we should just stop talking, because there's no point in making it too complicated, making people think too hard about it.
Do you think there are people though that see the risks of some of the treatments as equal to or greater than the risk of not treating? Is that where we're stuck, in that people will say, well, we don't recommend overnight ortho-K because there's a risk of ocular health complications of that therapy that are just as significant as the risk of becoming more myopic?
And definitely people would be thinking like that. When we suddenly sort of saw that this wasn't being sort of embraced that much, we did a lot of focus group work with optometry students, people just qualified, and people in practice as to what was holding them back. There was a whole load of things. I mean, there might be specific like that. It might be sort of fear of training. It might be saying, well, I can't do it because I haven't got access to accident measurement. And some of those are, valid clinical concerns, and others are factors that they don't feel ready to do it for, an emotional level, and they're just choosing a sort of, taking one step.
They don't want to adapt. They're stuck, and they have enough going on with their life. They don't need to be adding more to it, maybe.
Right.
Sure.
So I've occasionally used that. Have you ever read that book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah.
So, like 35 pages. Actually, the guy who wrote that, he was a doctor who,
Well, it was Spencer, right?
I guess I think it was, and he's a doctor who, I think he ever practiced, but, sold whatever 38 million copies of books. But that, in Who Moved My Cheese, that sort of, we have an awful lot of Who Moved My Cheese people in this thing.
Right.
So, which is why I think we just need to make it easy for them. In relation to specific risk benefits, I mean, the paper that we published last year with Mark Bullimore, we just went through every one of those things, which is just looking at the lifetime risk of a contact lens wearer and the fact that they'll be wearing a lens as a child. So you need to factor out, what's the risk of vision impairment and how many years will they have that to, and I mean, Mark's done a lot of work on that overnight risk, which is, quantifiably small compared to the impairment risk later on. And how does that risk benefit stack up to other forms of treatment?
Okay.
Yes.
So, so we've tried to, directly answer that question to say, well, look, okay, that's a valid question. The answer to the question is no. The risk benefit is in favor of treatment. If you personally don't buy that or are worried about it, then there are other treatments.
Sure.
Doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be doing anything about it. And orthokeratology is interesting because it's been around, for so long, and it just stumbled into being a mobile controlled treatment and from the optics. So actually, we have a lot of familiarity with it and a lot of history and data about it. There's a definite visibility bias from ophthalmology.
Sure.
Because the only person they see who wears an OK lens is the guy that turns up with a problem.
Correct.
Therefore, this is absolutely crazy. Every person with an OK lens in ends up with keratitis. I can't tell you how many I've seen. I've never seen a happy OK lens wearer.
Right.
You never see one.
You're right.
I
Right.
know.
So if that was a scientific paper, that's a bias. That's a massive bias. Your perception is biased by the patients you see.
Well, Ian, that's fantastic. We want to wrap things up,
Okay.
if we can, for this evening. You've been a wonderful guest.
Well, thank you for having me.
Extremely enlightening. And it's much more interesting than when I have the time to spend with my partner over here. So
Hey, the feeling is mutual.
I
so.
thank you for that. Now, we don't have a lot of going away gifts, except one. Just so you won't forget, Jason and I's your very own mouse pad.
Okay, thank you very much.
May I interrupt? Everybody wants them, and I'm sure you'll see this one on eBay by tomorrow morning. So, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
fully expect it'll be on the floor somewhere when we're walking out.
That'll be handy to.
But Ian, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.
I'm glad to keep you separated. You don't fight too much. So
No, that's
why
we put you in the middle.
You're a safe moderator.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
And
Well,
thank
you
you
much,
for
and-
attending. Thank you for watching. We had a wonderful guest this evening, Dr. Ian Flitcroft. Jason, thank you.
Thanks,
Very good
Craig.
job.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you again very
Bye,
soon.
everyone.
Bye-bye.